right, well, thanks everyone for coming. And so we're doing a practice match here between the UCA ethics bowl team and the UALR ethics bowl team, who hopefully will both do excellent in our competitions and beat at nationals. So that's our goal. I'll start off by just having everybody introduce themselves. I'll start with me. I am Dr. Benjamin Ryder. I am the coach of the ethics bowl team and also a professor in the philosophy department. I teach Greek and Roman philosophy and ethics. And so then I'll start with the judges, and then we'll go to each of the teams. So, judges.
I'm Michael Norton. I am the coach of the UALR ethics bowl team. I'm associate professor of philosophy, but I don't teach very much anymore because I'm also associate dean in our college.
I'm Dr. Sharon Mason. I also teach here at UCA in the philosophy department. I teach some history of philosophy and logic and epistemology, things like that. I am also a coach, sort of a supporting coach for our team. That's basically it.
Well, I'm Megan Horton. I am the admin in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies. I just graduated from here actually last semester, and I was on the ethics bowl team for, I guess, 2 years. So yeah, I'm looking forward to being on the other side.
I'm Blaze Robb. I'm a third year double major here at UCA doing philosophy and creative writing. This is second year on the team.
My name is Richard Ware. I'm a political science and philosophy major, also honors interdisciplinary studies and legal studies minor, and this is my 4th year on the team.
I am Nick Fadia. I am double majoring in philosophy and psychology. I'm a second year, and this is my second year on the team. I'm also honors interdisciplinary studies minor.
My name is Gage Figueroa. I'm a marketing film double major, and I like to draw and play.
My name is Jay Nobles. I'm a BFA with graphic design emphasis and an Asian studies minor. And it's my first year of competing, so we'll see how that goes.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Jacobs. I'm a second year student at UALR, but this is my first year participating in the ethics bowl team. I'm an engineering student, and I like to skate.
My name's Olivia. This is my first year on the team, but I'm a second year at UALR. I'm an economics major with a minor in history. I'm happy to be here.
My name is Xavier Parker. I'm a double major in psychology and philosophy. I'm minoring in statistics. I'm a senior, I'm about to graduate. It's horrible. And it's my 3rd year on that ethics bowl team.
I'm Cassie. I'm a philosophy major with a minor in gender studies. This is my 2nd year on the team, and hopefully there's many more to come.
All right, so we start off with a coin flip about choosing who's going first. So I will let you guys call the coin flip since you're the visitors. So heads or tails?
We'll do heads.
All right, heads. And it is heads. So you guys get to choose whether to go first or second.
We'll go second.
Okay. So UALR will go second. That means team 1 is UCA. Team 2 is UALR. All right, and I will randomly select the case that UCA will be discussing. So the case we have selected is case number 1, a pound of flesh. So the question is the proposed policy for Massachusetts of offering prisoners sentence reductions in exchange for organ and bone marrow donations an ethical way to try to address health inequities affecting Black and Hispanic communities? So for those of you who aren't familiar with this case, there was a proposed law in Massachusetts that would basically give prisoners a sentence reduction if they offered to give a donated organ or donate bone marrow. And it was eventually pulled from ethical concerns about that kind of law. So that's what this case is about. All right, so you guys have 2 minutes to consult on your presentation, starting now. time. So now you have 10 minutes for your presentation, starting now.
So I just wanted to say thank you all for being here. Very excited to present on this case. You asked, is the proposed policy from Massachusetts of offering prisoners sentence reductions in exchange for organ or bone marrow donations an ethical way to try to address health inequities affecting Black and Hispanic communities? And we would answer no to that question. While there are proposed benefits to this case, we simply do not see these proposed benefits outweighing the potential negatives that a policy like this could create. So from a Kantian perspective, we agree that everyone has a level of inherent human dignity and that infringing on this inherent human dignity is immoral. The proposed policy is coercive, disproportionately affects minority population, and is not available to all prisoners. It also undermines the validity of sentence lengths as defined in our legal system. And I'm going to pass on to Richard to further define the ethical tension and also Kantian ethics at large.
Thank you so much, Jay. And like Jay said, a lot of the issues that we're using to sort of answer this question comes from the fact that we're using Kant's theory of punishment, which is a theory built on the idea of retribution, that the punishment that whatever is going on in the penal system is to be proportional with the severity of the offense. And so his theory of punishment and retribution actually is built upon his conception of autonomy. And autonomy for Kant is the ability for one to be able to govern oneself according to their own moral reason. And this is very different from our normal conception of autonomy, which is autonomy as license, freedom to do whatever. But in the concept of things punitive, we're using Kantian's framework of retribution as a way to be able to see how exactly are punishments being administered in our prison systems and what are the ethical considerations for the punishment. And we see that a lot of the offenses going on in society right now are being addressed with the idea of a prison sentence. And so we are going to say, and Blaze is going to elaborate a little bit more on that the prison sentence is the punishment, but a lot of the other things going on, such as being able to donate bone marrow and being able to donate other organs, that's ultimately eroding a lot of the prisoners in their dignity, because it is coercing them into essentially being able to absolve a lot of their punishments by being able to get time off of their sentence. And that's also not fair because a lot of other prisoners who may not be able to donate certain things such as bone marrow or other vital organs are not able to serve out their sentence in a way that's equal. So the sentence is simply the punishment that the prison system is offering, but there's other ethical considerations for prisons to be able to allow prisoners to have that freedom to be able to do things out of the goodness of their heart, such as offer organ donations or bone marrow donations. And for a little bit more on how we can sort of allow for this framework to be realized in our penal system, I'll pass it to Blaze.
Thank you, Richard. So to emphasize what Richard said about autonomy, when we're talking about Kantian autonomy, we're really talking about one's ability to govern their own self and their future according to their own moral reason. This is not really an autonomy in the sense that they can do whatever they want. And so this is the kind of autonomy that can still be preserved because it's inherent to our human condition. Those who are put into prison don't lose this inherent dignity or autonomy to guide themselves. And so that's an important consideration that we're wanting to make when thinking about how are we treating prisoners once they are sentenced. Richard also mentioned that the sentence themselves acts as the primary reaction to the crime that this agent has committed against society. And I want to touch a little bit more on that. So when we think about prison, it's easy to think about the physical punishment of the situation of being locked away, potentially being abused, potentially being put to labor or something like that to pay for your crime. But in this lens, we're wanting to see prison as isolation from society for a duration of time. And that duration of time is contingent and dependent on the severity of the crime. So that's why we see a longer sentence for what we'd consider a worse crime. And in that situation, the severity of the sentence is not the physical conditions that the person has been put in. It's the amount of time that they're exiled away from society. And so when we give offers that have nothing to do with the crime that was committed, like donate bone marrow or give an organ, we see a reduction in this sentencing that has nothing to do with the crime that was committed. So when we're thinking about Kantian ethics and we're saying that this agent who has been in prison performs an action and then us as a society meet it with an equal reaction, that is a prison sentence, we then invalidate that reaction by saying, well, but we can shorten that. Ideally, in a functioning system, this sentence should be in equal proportion to the crime, and because of that equality, it shouldn't be touched on by another arbitrary factor. Touching on a bit of the coercive element of this kind of initiative, even if someone does not want to give an organ or to donate bone marrow, most people in this situation are going to do whatever they can to get out of prison quicker. And regardless of if that is needed or if they're, assuming that their sentencing was fair in the first place, which in this framework, we're assuming that this justice system is operating as intended and it is giving fair sentences, then we should not mess with those fair sentences. But to touch a little bit more on this coercive, sorry. Okay, so for these prisoners to have a fair choice about any activity that they may do in prison, we do not want to make it a contingent for them. We do not want to make it a need for them to, for these actions that these prisoners are taking, we don't want them to potentially invalidate a fair sentence because of an action. And any prisoner is going to take this action, even if it could cause bodily harm to them, or even if in the case of doing something like physical labor, it could cause deterioration of their physical body. And in these situations, we fear that prisoners may sacrifice their own physical safety or their own physical well-being for that to happen. And then for that final point about equitability, this was a huge point that we thought was valuable for this case, in the sense that not everyone is going to be equally able to donate an organ or to be able to donate blood marrow or bone marrow. You know, if we're thinking about someone who has health issues, someone who is older, someone who has a different blood type, we may not be able to offer these types of solutions to people. And in that situation, we end up valuing the autonomy of those prisoners that are eligible more than we value the autonomy of those prisoners that are not able to donate. And so this distinction seems more or less arbitrary. And if we're thinking about these prison sentences as a fair reaction to the action of the crime that was committed, what allows us to say that for some individuals, this sentence can be reduced, but for others they cannot, simply because of a health disposition or their age? So because of these hard tensions, we feel that it is more or less safe to say that in most cases, these types of sentence reduction opportunities bring about more challenges than they solve in behalf of the prisoner's autonomy. And I'll pass it to Richard.
And it's slightly, or to lastly answer a bit of the question, then does these donations offer an ethical way to address health inequities affecting Black and Hispanic populations? Well, the constitution of many of these prison populations are Black and Hispanic, and as we're already eroding a lot of the dignity going into the premise of allowing this bill possibly to allow for people to make these donations on merits of bone marrow and organs, it's inadvertently not really addressing the also issues of Black and Hispanic populations who also inhabit both the spaces outside and inside the prison. And to sort of offer some objections to us, we're going to see if we can re-clarify.
And so I was just going to ask Richard or Blaze some questions, maybe they can clarify, or some opposing arguments. Does imprisoning someone not inherently attack this idea of autonomy that you've been trying to establish with like a Kantian framework? How doesn't imprisoning someone mean inherently that you're taking their autonomy away? Yeah, that's where we're going to make the quick distinction between the autonomy as license, which is the freedom to do whatever you please, and the autonomy for Kant, which is the ability to govern oneself according to the laws of morality and justice. And so prisons, built on Kant's theory of punishment, they are built to, of course, imprison somebody as a punishment for whatever offense was created. But the prisoners, or the prisons and the prison systems, should not have practices that erode the dignity for someone to be able to govern themselves. So under this kind of framework, you wouldn't say there's like an instance where this can be ethical. You're saying inherently that there's like a breach of like ethics. Inherently, this opportunity for prisoners to be able to offer bone marrow or other donations is unethical for sentence reductions. And with the little time that we have left, to just sort of re-clarify, no is the answer. Prisoners should not be coerced into being able to do these things for sentence reductions. Instead, prisons should be able to see how they can reorient themselves to allow for the prisoners to have the dignity to be able to do so of their own free will.
All right. Okay, you guys have 1 minute to consider your answer, starting now.
So I have non-vital organs of tissue and bone marrow that compete on the dignity, like how would that come into play? Just wanted to know, like, so some regards to like census resources they do exile society, so they have to do with their prime ministers, running using subjects trying to like offering and offering so they have demonstrated like the ability to create society by performing this
Okay, UALR, you have 5 minutes for your commentary, starting now.
Right. Thank you so much for your presentation. Just to clarify your answer to the question of, is the proposed policy on an ethical way to address the inequities amongst Black and Hispanic communities? Your answer to that was no, the proposed benefits do not outweigh the harms. You say this is because it's coercive, it is not available to all, and you also use deontology to defend that, specifically his theory of punishment. With that, I'm going to pass it to my teammate.
Thank you. So a key point in your argument was human dignity, and that was a very good point to make. However, something that I wanted to explore further is the mention of non-vital tissue and organs, something such as bone marrow transplant or like skin grafts or some other necessarily non-vital treatment. Something like that wouldn't necessarily impede on the dignity of the prisoners because it wouldn't limitate their autonomy, livelihood, and health ongoing in the future. So how do you feel like that relates to the sense of human dignity in regards to what their options are going forward? Also, you mentioned that sentencing through exile in society doesn't have anything implicitly due to the crime. So offering an alternative for the prisoners to demonstrate that they are capable of reintegrating into society through these somewhat to some degree selfless acts. Would you agree that there can be alternative ways to prove that they have the ability to reintegrate into society, which is some argument point of the prison system? And I believe my teammate Xavier had other questions.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. Great presentation first. I had a few questions. First, I want to ask about this idea of autonomy and respect for the prisoners, because I think it's an easy argument to make that us making the decision for the inmate is actually disrespecting their autonomy. For us to say that we know better than you, rather than give you the decision to make what you think is best or self-govern, right? We're going to do it for you. We're going to do it for you. Is that disrespectful in and of itself, right? Next, I want to talk about the inherent distrust already in the medical system, present in the communities of people of color. So, for instance, the Tuskegee experiment took advantage of Black men and said, we're going to see the long-term effects of syphilis on this specific group of people, specifically a group of people that is of color, right? How does this already play into the case? How does a distrust in the medical system from people of color already play into the case? Next, I want to talk about this idea of assuming that the system is operating as intended. Because I think in an ideal world, that's great. We can assume that it's operating as intended. But also, prisons it's not just a place for isolation, like you said in your presentation. There are abusive parts of prison. There are parts that make it not what it's intended and much, much worse for the prisoner. Is it not a good argument to make that, hey, we're going to do some good over here with people of color who need organs, and we're going to do some good for you because these prison systems are operating as intended. There's a lot of abuse, and we're going to let you get out of this situation a little bit sooner. I'm going to pass it to my teammate.
Right. Another point of your argument was arguing on the case for equitability. Couldn't you also make the argument that proposing this option for prison sentences could benefit the equity of all people within the United States? With that being said, something in regards of the people who are needed transplant, particularly the Black and Hispanic communities as well. And with that,
Yeah, I just want to touch on this point a little bit more because I feel like we haven't talked a lot about the group of people that really has a stake in this, right? And that's the people, specifically the people of color who need these organs, right? Their lives are on the line, right? And right here we have a group of population that could be willing to save their life, right? And talking about losing a life is a great moral loss, right? And we're talking about it specifically for this group of people, which might be even worse, that they're being isolated because of this. So can you talk a little bit more about why their lives being saved isn't enough of a reason to implement this policy? With that, we're going to see the rest of our time. Thank you.
Yeah, 1 minute to consider your response. Starting Okay, Team UCA, you have 5 minutes for your response, starting now.
Hi, so thank you so much for your questions. We really appreciate it. We wanted to start by tackling your question regarding human dignity and its impacts on donating non-vital tissue. So we still do believe that this is an infringement on the Kantian autonomy of prisoners, as Kant would have put it, because the decision to donate the tissue is not made on the prisoner's own terms, rather it is made in a coercive environment. And I would like to pass that on to Richard to further explain that.
Yeah, so being able to donate, while that is a great thing for a prisoner to be able to do, to donate part of their body in order to help another person in society, the way that it's being offered as a way for sentence reduction or a reduction on their sentence is still inherently coercive, because if other people in the prison are getting time off their sentence, then that doesn't really create an even playing field for the rest of the prisoners. And in that regard, it's coercive not just to the prisoner, but also to the people the prisoner offended, the victims. And so the proportionality of Kant's theory of retribution isn't just focused on the punishment itself for the prisoner, but also what is the punishment supposed to address, and that's punishment for the prisoner because it's offering a sort of redress for the grievance on the victim as well. And so for that to be an opportunity for prisoners to get to do a good for society, that's still ultimately creating a larger evil, a larger bad for the soul of the human.
And you also asked about how do we respect the autonomy by deciding for these prisoners. I think it's a very valuable question. And it also kind of touches on this distinction between the two autonomies that we may refer to. And one of those being the ability for someone to do whatever they want and to enact whatever change they want to enact, and then responding to someone's moral decision-making that they have done to themselves, especially in the case of a crime where maybe something immoral has been done against a society, a life has been lost, something has been taken. We see the preservation of these prisoners' autonomy as respecting the choices that they made that led to them being imprisoned. And this, of course, does rely on a functioning system. And we cannot agree with you more that there is a multitude of problems with the criminal justice system. But in thinking about how a policy like this should be ethically implemented, we're going into it assuming that the sentences themselves are not flawed, because that's not a flaw that we can go about fixing by offering reduction by donating bone marrow. That's a problem that we have to solve by fixing the sentences. And so when we're thinking about the sentences, assuming that they're true, the fact that that sentence was given as an equal reaction to the action that the agent took is respecting their autonomy, because we are responding to the action that they took as a society. And to quickly also cover this distrust of the medical system for minority communities, we also wanted to touch a little bit more about this. And we fear that the implementation of these systems could end up in a reliance on these communities being used. And even if it's for the benefit of people of color who are out and not imprisoned, we don't want our bank of bone marrow or tissues that are being donated to rely on a population of a certain community to be imprisoned for the safety of others to be guaranteed. And so we feel that that's too much of a sacrifice. Even if we are looking at potential lives to be saved, we are devaluing a population to be the donors for that. And that feels like its own version of disqualifying the legitimacy of life there. Gage?
So just to kind of further clarify, like a through line on top of like how might the mistrust affect this case? So essentially, with our framework and with our response, we're saying that no matter what, that this is like an inherently like wrong thing to do, right? Even considering the like implications of the criminal justice system, this could maybe exacerbate those already existing flaws. But even in this ideal criminal justice system, this has no place there because of things like coercion and because of things like not that is not equal to all prisoners, and because ultimately this a prison sentence should respect the reaction to someone's autonomy, but this invalidates that. Nick?
Yeah, just to go back to your question about the non-vital tissue donation. The conditions in prisons are already so bad that just expecting that there would be nice enough conditions to allow for good and healthful recoveries is unrealistic. And to go back to our idea of retributive justice, even for these non-vital tissue donations, you're reducing the sentence, but not everybody can reduce their sentence. It's only those people who are still helping, because there's still going to be people in these non-vital tissue donations who aren't able to do that. So you're not putting this available to everyone, and you're reducing sentences.
All right, we now have 10 minutes for the judges to ask questions of Team UCA and for Team UCA to respond, starting now.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. It was very well articulated and thought-provoking, and I enjoyed it. The question I have for you is, if I understood you correctly, your part of your argument, at least, is that what makes this program unethical is that it reduces the time, right, as part of the sentence, and in fact, the time is sort of the central part of what a prison sentence is, as punishment, right, for immoral behavior, right, for crime. So my question is, if that's the case, then are you also committed to saying that any circumstance that would give a prisoner time off of their sentence, time off for good behavior, time off for participating in educational programs or community service programs, etc., those are all unethical because they're all reducing the sentences that the prisoners were given?
Maybe we have a minute to confer.
Thank you for the great question. This was something we thought about a lot in the case. You know, something like good behavior is often tacked on to sentences that may be less extreme, and they kind of leave an open window. And overall, there may be value in something like good behavior clauses, but we see that it's really hard to give a concrete definition of what something like good behavior means. And we can say that someone has been obedient, they follow directions, but does that mean that they have been a good behavior, or does that mean they're abiding by their prison sentence? In that way, it can be kind of difficult to pin down exactly what is fair. We do think that there are absolutely examples where sentences can be given that can be undone or reduced in retrospect. Something that we talked about is drug legalization and decriminalization. Of course, if someone is arrested for something that's criminal and then a law's changed, something like that can absolutely warrant a sentence reduction or a sentence waive, because we look at the initial action in that content sense and we say, well, actually, our reaction was the thing that was flawed. So we're going to go back and correct it. But in a system where prisons are functioning well, it does not come obvious to us that something like good behavior should be allowed, and it does raise questions. There perhaps can be situations where that is fair, but overall, generally speaking, we lean against it because how arbitrary and hard something like that to pin down is.
Can I follow up? Yeah, just to give you a quick concrete example, instead of something vaguer like good behavior, prisoners participated in firefighting in wildfires in California. Would you say like a program like that is also unethical?
So
one of the incentives they got.
So to kind of further clarify on the idea, the fact that we are questioning this idea is we are taking down or tearing down the idea that this sentence kind of matched the crime, right? And so while it's possible to give back or on good behavior, there's ultimately an admittance that this is an adjustment or a response to the beginning sentence was not accurate, right? And so we're saying,
thank you, Gage.
That's right.
In a case like wildfires, there's competing interest there because we see that the act itself is perhaps ethical, and the fact that putting out fires and protecting other people's lives, that in itself is an ethical action. But is reduction of the sentence after the fact an ethical action? And we talked about circumstances where, if we're looking at a Kantian perspective, the action that someone may take in prison warrants a reaction that it is a reduction of that sentence. But once again, we found it very difficult to pin down a concrete way of looking at that, where we can attribute someone's societal benefit as if it undoes the crime that they have done, because they still did that crime, and under their autonomy, they still have deserved that equal reaction that was given by the government and by society overall. So that question is super valuable, because though these actions like community service, like firefighting, these have ethical value, and they use the work power and the force of prisoners ethically, but the system that pushes prisoners to do such a thing for a sentence reduction poses strong ethical questions that leaves us saying that it's broadly unadvisable. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I kind of want to ask a question going off of that, because I was also very curious about other ways of sentence reduction, and kind of you guys' response to also maybe not seeing that as totally ethical, given that the definition is really vague and it's unsure. It's difficult to pin it down. I wanted to ask what you just said about it doesn't undo, the crime and the time that they kind of have to pay for what they did. I think that, being able to reduce your time in prison, does it not show more things of like people can change? Like people in prison systems may need opportunities to show that they have changed, they want to do better, they want to get better. Like if you guys kind of think that some of these may not be like ethical in their vague descriptions, are there other ways that you guys maybe have some ideas for reducing time in prison?
Well, since we're using Kant's theory of retribution, and let's just back up to the idea of what good behavior and being able to firefight or be out on work release really means. Those programs, to be able to have a reduction on their sentence, inherently are rehabilitative. They are trying to reintegrate prisoners into society. So the rehabilitation isn't inconsistent with our theory of retribution. We are saying that to have those programs, but to offer a reduction on the sentence, is inherently eroding the dignity of the prisoner and the person who's also offended, because they haven't served yet the time that was allotted to them by virtue of the punishment. And so there might be ways for prisoners to be able to participate in ways they promote the common good, except sentence reductions for things to where people change doesn't necessarily rectify the actual wrong that was done. That doesn't mean that prisoners can't be able to firefight or be able to do other forms of work. Just under this theory of retribution, we want to make sure that it's proportional to the offense, but also to what is being able to help the prisoners not only serve their time, but how society can possibly orient itself to have a rehabilitative system, have a concept of rehabilitative justice, and what that actually looks like.
Yeah, I have a question about coercion, and I wanted to talk a little bit about like this because it seems to be playing an important role in your theory. But I think this is going to kind of try to take the same track that Xavier was taking, which is like, what if someone in prison says, no, this is something I really want to do? Why shouldn't they? I mean, why shouldn't it be counted as not just sort of a problem for their autonomy, but in fact, your position is the problem for autonomy, because it's saying, no, you can't have this avenue available to you in order to reduce time. And I think that this becomes even more pressing if you think, somebody says, well, I really messed up, but now I want to do something good.
I would like to touch on that, if that's okay. So we are not even saying that a prisoner should not be allowed to, of their own volition, choose to donate an organ or bone marrow or anything of that nature. However, we are saying that if a prisoner chooses to do something good, it should not be an action that is coerced out of them by the prison system. And by offering these sentence reductions in an environment in which their autonomy is already infringed upon by the prison system, this is something that unfortunately is coercive, and even though it does have benefits for minority populations, that does not outweigh the harm that is being done to these people who would be exploited by the system.
And you think it's coercive even if they say, no, like, I'm good with this, I choose to do it?
If it's for a prison, like a sentence reduction, then yes, because you're basically creating that like incentive structure to like get that out.
Okay, good. Because then, like, where's the problem located? Is the problem that it's coercive, or is the problem that the retributive justice isn't met? Because you're saying both things, or is it?
I think it is.
I think it is both.
Okay, that helps to clarify.
The sentence is a response to their action, and that's retributive. The restorative action cannot take away from that fact.
And we feel that an expectation that there is an allowance for sentence reduction sets a bad precedent, and it invalidates the system of sentence giving overall. And so we feel that there's a danger in, I see. I see the rest of my time.
All right. Okay, thanks, Bert. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read the question. So our second case that we'll be considering is case number 5, inclusion or erasure. So the question is, do the producers of prominent high-budget movies, musicals, or TV shows have an ethical obligation to increase the representation of actors from historically underrepresented groups? You have 2 minutes to consult, starting now. So this case was centered around basically like a movie where they use CGI villains and some people criticize them for not using actual actors' workism, and then they're obviously so what this is about is like how should we relate to Okay, Team UALR, you have 10 minutes for your presentation, starting now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, moderator, for the question. Thank you, audience. It's really large this time. In response to the question, do the producers of prominent high-budget movies, musicals, or TV shows have an ethical obligation to increase the representation of actors from historically underrepresented groups? Our team's position is yes, they do. This is because it would create more good to cast these actors who would represent them the same identity that they have, and it'd be more fair to do so as well. We see a real friction here on this side of the case between the creative freedom of writers, producers, and directors against the authentic representation of lived experiences through identity. And we're going to use prima facie duties to defend this position. With that, I'm going to pass to my teammate.
Thank you, everyone. So to answer this question, we'll be utilizing the prima facie framework, as Xavier had mentioned, as this allows us to best explore the complexities of this case. Prima facie incorporates a list of moral duties, which are self-evident, meaning they have inherent worth, and we use these to drive our moral reasoning. Duties in this regard referring to the idea of these permanent moral reasons that we utilize to determine what is morally actionable in our decision-making process, of which we try to balance our all things considered duties. We'll be utilizing predominantly, in this case, the duties of fidelity, benevolence, non-maleficence, and retribution as well. Justice, we're trying to create this balance between rewarding what's right and punishing the harm that we've done, which goes into retribution, where we look at the historical accounts of what's been happening to this marginalized group in society and actors as a whole. With beneficence, we're going to be trying to right our harms as well and try to promote those virtues that we have. And non-maleficence, try to restrict the harms that we're doing. We recognize that there's more than one dimension of moral consideration here, which is why we sort of chose this framework. And with that, I will have my teammate explain further.
Great, and so let's just set some context here about this question. The situation that brought something like this to light happened with the adaptation of Snow White. And in this movie, there are 7 dwarves, 7 magical dwarves, which originally were planned to be cast as people with dwarfism, right? Which are different. Someone who's a dwarf, which is a magical creature, and then someone who is a person with dwarfism. And after backlash from Peter Dinklage, they decided to reverse on this decision and made the dwarves in the movie done entirely by CGI. And so what this does is it showed kind of the lack of opportunities for people with disabilities, right? And so the first point here is that there aren't a lot of jobs open for people with disabilities who are also actors in the first place. And then secondly, the jobs that are open that the characters do have disabilities with, only 21% of those roles are filled with people who actually are actors with disabilities, right? That's in contrast to the population in America, which has 30% of the people in America have disabilities. And there's such a drastic, disproportionate casting when it comes to actors with disabilities and actors without disabilities. With that, I'm going to pass to my teammate.
Yeah, so, this idea that, we are saying that there is an ethical obligation to increase representation. And so, the clear question that comes after that is, well, what do you mean? How do you do that, right? And the way that we do this is through an incentive called priority without requirement, right? So what does that mean? So we believe that these kind of movies, musical, TV shows, video games, etc., when it comes to characters that have disabilities, they should start by trying to find someone with that relevant disability. We do recognize within prima facie duties that things can shift and be subjective depending on the context. And we feel that such a system of priority without legal requirement helps us achieve this all things considered duty. So to go kind of a little more into the duties that we see at stake here with this case is mainly we are talking about this idea of justice, right? So people with disabilities in the entertainment system do have kind of this already double exclusion setup, right? So not only are there not many roles being designed for characters with disabilities in the first place, but the roles that are available with, when you do the math from the case facts, is about 42 disabled roles for TV shows a year. But when we do have that, 79% of those roles go to able-bodied actors, not people with disabilities, right? So we see that people with disabilities in this industry are facing this double exclusion. As far as reparation goes and concerns to our prima facie duty is that we definitely see it in a form of historical context. And as the question itself represents, is that they are historically underrepresented. And we feel that with such a priority model, we can help negate some of that issue. We'd like to address what may be acceptable reasons on why a production could potentially go with full creative ability. We see what is acceptable is, let's say that there is a situation where a certain plot puts someone with a disability in an unsafe environment. We feel that that would turn the prima facie duty to have that more heavy than the duty to cast authentically. We also think that in terms of plot line, there are some plots where someone may start with a disability, turns in they don't have one, or they don't have one and it turns into a disability, and this can't be played by one character, so maybe that is as well. What is not acceptable is convenience, right? So anything in concerns to star power, budget, time restraints is not an acceptable reason to further unrepresent these groups. And with this, I'm gonna pass it to my teammate.
Right. So someone may very fairly well say, hey, we should give directors full creative freedom, right? Because this is all about actors fully transforming into their given role. And also that the market will begin to adapt to this as people push for underrepresented groups to be represented in the media. However, the market has not adapted, even as people have started to push for this. And we say that beneficence should be given weight to this, right? Not only in acting in the benefit of the actors, but also to people who are viewing these movies, viewing this media. And we also are giving weight to justice, which we see as fairness. And from this point of view, we're not really considering the historical context of why these groups are not being represented. And with that, I will pass it to my team.
Great. And so I want to address another alternative viewpoint that is, well, maybe we should impose more laws, more restrictions on these producers so that we can try to force this kind of inclusion for people with disabilities. And with that, we'd say, well, there's already laws in place against discrimination. And we're still having a problem with this discrepancy and people with disabilities getting cast in these roles. And so what we want to do is try something different here to try to get the desired outcome. And so if it starts from the producers, if it starts from the people who are writing the scripts, who are creating the characters, then hopefully this will create a sort of societal change that pushes to the people who are consuming the media, who are consuming the movies, TV shows, the musicals, great things like that. A good example of this happening is the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite push that happened on social media, right? And so this was a movement led by social change, not a policy enacted, right? Which actually did lead to real change. And we want to see something like that, similar to that, happen here in this space. And so just to recap here, our position is that yes, producers do have an obligation to put priority towards people with disabilities to be cast in these roles. And that's just because it's not fair to them. It's been historically unfair to them, and we need to pay reparations to be able to cast them in these roles, and overall be better for everyone in this group and in these marginalized groups. With that, I'll cede the rest of our time.
All right. So UCA, you have 1 minute. Consider your commentary, starting now. Okay, you have 5 minutes for your commentary, starting now.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. We're really fascinated by it, and we agree with a lot of your points. We just have a few questions. Our first question has to do with your ethical framework, prima facie duties. We think that's so interesting. We had a similar one that we use, virtue ethics, but we like some clarity. There's the idea that there is priority without legal requirement, and this all helps all things duty, that these producers have an obligation to be able to cast people in these historically underrepresented people in these roles congruent with their identity. And we have some questions, particularly about the idea that convenience is not acceptable. And my question to you is, if convenience is not acceptable, but there was a mention of star power being a big thing, but also the eyes and the amount of people who might show up to go see somebody like Patrick Stewart play Professor X in X-Men, even though he's not bound to a wheelchair, but he still is somebody who's portraying someone in that framework. how might that apply across the board for other people who have these sort of characteristics? The way that we were able to respond to this question was through our framework of virtue ethics, which considers various different virtues such as justice. The producer should be considerate. They should exhibit integrity, epistemic humility, basically reaching outside of themselves to be able to see how can we accurately cast people in these roles. And these virtues are to guide the casting decisions, but also like to sort of the art direction in general. And for another question in your framework, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so we had a lot of similarities in our framework, and I just wanted to kind of get some clarification on maybe some of the differences because I've never heard of this framework. So you guys talked about beneficence, non-maleficence, but then you also threw out the word like fidelity, and I just wanted to know what did you guys mean by that? And then retribution. And so is retribution synonymous with justice? And then so for a more like question about representation is these are fantasy dwarves, and there's probably like a congruent argument to be made that this isn't representation in film in terms of like disabilities or like what likeness of the person, right? And so how is there still an obligation to represent these people, and kind of how far does that go, right? You look at like a movie like Brokeback Mountain, Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal are not gay, but even like queer people have kind of accepted this as representation. So does it have to just be what are your guidelines for adequate representation?
And I would also like to touch on what Gage was saying with your implementation of priority without requirement. And just, I have a question on in what specific roles this applies in. We've mentioned Snow White live action, but let's touch on the former board game, now media conglomerate Dungeons and Dragons with their use of fantasy dwarves. Fantasy dwarves share real life characteristics with little people. So in terms of voice acting, video games, animated representation, should we also aim to give these roles to little people, or should we allow these roles to be fantastical in a sense? And I'm going to pass it on to Blaze.
Thank you, Jay. So I was curious about y'all's position. You said that these producers should have an obligation to increase representation for underrepresented groups, but the question itself is asking kind of about these pieces of media broadly, not concerning roles that are specifically tailored to a particular group or trying to abide by the representation of a particular group. And so I'm curious what y'all's thoughts are on the obligation these producers have to cast underrepresented populations in the normal roles that are not necessarily aiming to be representative. Do we have some sort of quota, or do we have a limit that we ought to meet? And is there anything that kind of can dictate that ought for us, and to what extent we need to know that ought? And then I have one more question. You mentioned the disproportionate statistics between disabled Americans and disabled actors. I felt that particularly with talking about disabled people. This is kind of like a potentially problematic statistic, as we're talking about a condition that could leave many people not able to work. And so I'm curious about, when we're thinking about these statistics, do you have a goal in mind? Do you have a line that you're trying to reach? Do you have something that is more equitable to the American population that you're trying to reach in the statistics of these roles, and why the number that y'all envision?
We'll see the rest of our time.
Okay. All right, you have 1 minute to consider your response, starting now. Okay, so your response to commentary, you have 5 minutes, starting now.
Thank you for the lovely question. We thought about them thoroughly, and we actually would love to get a chance to answer these. So specifically in regards to some of the duties that we had mentioned, the one that you asked was fidelity. To expand on that further, fidelity is the idea that you are like morally required to follow through on statements that you make, whether there is like consequence at the end or not. To sort of summarize it in a more succinct way, I like to compare it with the term integrity. It's doing what's right even if nobody is watching. So that's sort of what I meant by fidelity. And if I may have misspoken, said retribution when really it was more of like reprehension, where trying to make amends for things that we had done in the past wrongly. And with that, we would utilize justice as well, but they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah. So this issue of likeness of person is something that we also grappled with a lot, especially given the fact that, Snow White was the given context for this case, right? What we want to draw a parallel from is that we do not want to push harmful stereotypes. And so this issue of bringing out Dungeons and Dragons, I believe, that would be pushing harmful stereotypes onto people with dwarfism. What we believe is that through a priority without requirement model and through a market standpoint is that it would push producers to better write and better produce. What we would have suggested for the Snow White producer was to take away the fact that the dwarves in it are magical and replace that with the very practical being of that people with dwarfism, they have jobs just like the miners in that movie. And with that, I want to pass that to my friend Xavier.
Great, thank you so much. So first I want to talk about this idea of a goal, right? Because when do we know when we've hit the standard, when we know when we've done enough good? And the answer to that is we want it to be proportional. That's the answer. And so if 30% of Americans have disabilities, then to get rid of this double exclusion that we talked about in our main argument, we would want 30% of character roles, right, to be of people who are disabled, if it's happening in the US, right? And we want it to be proportional. And then we also want the amount of actors that are being cast to be proportional as well. We want it to be 30%. Now, that's when you've hit it perfectly, right? But any movement in the right direction is good movement, because right now it's so disproportionate, right? It's so disproportionate. Second, I want to talk about this Professor X idea. And I'm not sure the actor's name, but I know he did a really great job. He did a really, really great job. But there are actors who have disabilities, like they aren't able to walk, and they have to live their life in a wheelchair. And that restricts the roles that they are able to get when they go into the audition room, right? Now, the very famous actor that played Professor X in the role can play anyone that walks, which is a much wider range, right? But for people who don't have that ability, who are disabled, it's cut much more narrowly. So giving priority to these people is going to be overall, the all things considered, best thing to do, because the amount of roles that can be casted for this person is so much more narrow than it is for people who are able-bodied, right? Next, I want to talk about this idea of, can you cast someone who's disabled in a normal role, quote unquote, someone without disabilities? The answer to that is, of course, we'd love it. That'd be great. Now, the answer is talking about, this question, or the way that we framed it, is specifically talking about priority to people and actors with disabilities to characters with disabilities, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you can't hire people with disabilities for normal roles, right? But you would have equal consideration of them with any other actor, right? And that makes sense, because we want the best person to play the role if available, right? For these roles that are have a character that is able-bodied. But that doesn't mean that you can't give priority to the roles that have characters that have disabilities, because it's so narrow. With that, we'll see the rest of our time.
Okay. Judges, you have 1 minute to consult on the questions. Okay, judges, your questions. You have 10 minutes, starting now.
Okay, I guess I'll start. First of all, it was a really good presentation. I haven't read over the case, so I think that was really helpful for me to like get an idea of what you guys are saying. And I would say for the most part, I really do agree with you guys. So one thing that I want to ask might just be some clarification on what you're meaning with some of the wording that I heard from you guys was especially talking about equal consideration of, I guess, different kinds of people, but also priorities for maybe those with disabilities or those who have been historically not represented. This to me is almost kind of sounding like affirmative action, kind of, where it's like there's a quota that we have to meet. So should we kind of be more focused on that priority and that quota, and even if that means risking maybe say talent, experience, wisdom, what someone can really bring to the role versus just the representation of it. So if you guys could maybe touch on that or clarify a little.
Can we have a moment to confer?
Absolutely.
Specifically, the question is about high budget movies and films. So they have hundreds, if not, they have hundreds of people to pick from. So we were answering mainly from the perspective of companies like Disney, right? So.
Right, and we also want to talk about this idea because we answered it in commentary about what's the goal, right? But we didn't address it in our presentation because that's not an essential quality of our position, right? We want any movement towards people with disabilities being more represented. So I'd say a key distinction here between affirmative action, like you brought up, and the position that we're adopting here is the end goal isn't as tangible as this. I want this number of people in the movie or cast in these roles. We want to value the process of this inclusion, and we're saying that because laws haven't worked in the past, really it should start from the people who are at the top. It should start from the people, producers, writers, to write that in and start this inclusion effort. It's about the process.
Okay, so that, just to follow up really fast, that kind of goes to something that you guys started with like balancing creative freedom and identity and representation. Would you say so?
1000%.
Okay. Thank you guys.
I think mine's a follow-up. So one thing I would like to hear more about is about kind of like it's not just who is portraying roles, like different things, but how those roles are being portrayed. So for instance, I'm wondering, have you thought about widening the scope beyond just an actor being represented, but sort of having consultants or folks involved in the creative process? To what extent is it sufficient to say, okay, we've kind of got, a quota met or something, or is it more, to what extent is it important to have respectful, faithful portrayals of people with disabilities in the artistic work themselves in a way that is quite significantly beyond just the fact that a certain number of people are playing certain roles? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so I was wondering if you could address that.
Yeah, so firstly, the reason why we really wanted to focus on the, specifically actors is because the question specifically outlines the representation of actors, right? So that's why we really wanted to drive that home. What you're speaking to, we 100% agree with. Consultation, etc. We want to make sure that these roles are not just a checkbox. We want these productions to seriously engage and make sure that they are not perpetuating even harmful stereotypes.
And just to further add on to this, not only does the question focus on actors, but there is a specific sort of value that representation in the media can give, that a representation to the people around media can't give as well. Now, we want to say we definitely want everyone to be included in all aspects of every career, right? But what makes actors so uniquely engaging is the effect that it has on the larger world. So consultants do great work for their actors in booking those roles, right? But the person who's the actor gets to touch every single person's life that sees that piece of media. And so that sort of exposure, that sort of inclusion, that sort of breaking down of the stereotypes is so, so important to the change in society that we've talked about throughout our entire presentation. We need it to start from the society, the people going to see these movies, the people who care, rather than the policy, and that can enact real change.
So the question put this in terms of an ethical obligation, right? And I think that you spoke in terms of obligation when you made a case in terms of, a collection of prima facie duties that you have to balance the demands for, right? So I want to come back to this idea of obligation, right? Because if I understand your position, it's that producers, directors, of people making these productions have an ethical obligation to first try to cast people with disabilities, or maybe more broadly, people from underrepresented groups, to play characters with those same disabilities or other underrepresented identities, right? So my question is, what is the extent of that obligation? Like, basically, how hard do they need to try before they can then say, okay, this isn't working out? You mentioned a couple of reasons why you think, well, they might be let off the ethical hook for this, but explain a little more about what they really need to do to show that they're making a good faith effort.
So I think that one of the things that we really want to consider here is the prioritization. So it'd be not in good faith to say we need this number of people with these disabilities to try out for the role. That would not be in good faith. But what we would want to do is say that of all the people who come in to try to audition for the role, we go, okay, well, this is the character we have with X disability, and these are the people who are auditioning for the roles with the same disability, and we want to prioritize them. How is there an exception to these? Well, first we want to say that if their safety is put at risk, like we said in our presentation, then that is a good reason to not cast someone in this role. Now, another reason would be maybe throughout the course of this story that the person or the character does not start with a disability, but then gains the disability later in the film. And so if that's the case, then you would need an able-bodied person to portray the first half of the film because they're able-bodied in the first half. So this prioritization effort is to, how do we actually do that? We want to say, well, here's a role that has disabilities. We want everyone with this disability to at least try out for the role, and then we can look at them. And aside from these safety reasons or this logical inconsistencies in a film, that would be you would have that obligation to cast them. Furthermore, and we cut this from our presentation, but we had a position that was if they choose to not cast a person in this role, they would need to address the public on why. And so that's to hold them accountable and be honest with the society and say, we're not trying to exclude anyone, but we do want to tell you the practical reasons why this is not the case. And that way we can be a little more sure that this isn't a bias or an exclusion, but now we're being transparent between producer and public.
1 minute.
And one of the reasons that we find that such a priority model would be helpful and would kind of push back against what if these productions just make some bad thing? We don't want it, right? With Snow White specifically, once trailers were put out, once pictures were put out of this decision that Disney was going to use CGI instead, on TikTok and Instagram, there were huge boycotts of this film, right? And part of that is because people want to see more people, that are diverse, displayed within our media. And so this question of, well, what's legit, what's not legit, what's good faith, what's bad faith, we think is pretty outlined by what we find acceptable and not acceptable, and by the consumers' opinion.
All right, that's time. So thank you, UALR. It's the judges' time to finish calculating their scores, and then we will see who won. Yeah, so
Yeah, dude, I really liked your framework for that. You guys kind of full sent it more than like we did in our case, and I prefer that. You know,
Yeah, sure.
Like,
sure.
you should hire them, and like you have an ethical obligation to. And,
What was your position in?
Ours was like kind of that, but like a lot more like consideration, a lot more. We just ran into so many like different wires and nuances of the case, and so we made sure like consideration was part of the case. We had like a pretty big stand, like, 7 boards, right? One, they were kind of not given a role where maybe they should have been able to, but also like maybe like ask them to begin with, right? So Peter Dinklage is not this token figure. He does not decide if people with dwarfism or little people can be in these movies. So maybe just ask. Maybe just ask. Have them part of the conversation. That'd be
It's interesting because me and Cassie had differing opinions on whether they should prioritize people with dwarfism in these roles.
Because it feels like you can kind of make like a
exactly
stereotype. And so that's not our decision to make. And so we kind of have that cop out of like, well, in each individual instance it's different. So yours is more like, no, we need representation. I jive with that.
Cool.
I still would like to, just because I'm genuinely curious, how do you feel about like the voice acting and animation? Do you think that these roles still should be like? Do you think a more authentic performance is allowed by doing that? Or I'm just curious.
Sure. If we got that question in judges' questions, or you did give it to ask for commentary, but there's a reason we didn't address it. I would have said that the main reason that people with disabilities aren't getting these roles probably aren't getting these roles is because it's like this wheelchair thing. It's much more narrow, the roles that they can be cast in. When we're talking about voiceovers, when we're talking about animation, that's not the case anymore. Right? Okay. And so I would say if that was our position, that's how I'd answer it. Now I have no idea what my personal position is, but that would be our team's position.
I feel like this is something that you discussed a little bit in one of our meetings.
Yes,
right?
we did.
The difference between sort of the visibility in certain roles and something that's not as visible if it's in video games.
Certainly.
The little note y'all had though about just transparency to the public, like I thought that was great, and
that was so strong.
Could
I won't
worth
lie,
including
we had
in
so
the
much to include.
Yes,
I realized very quickly, we're running out of time. Okay.
No, I totally get it.
There's so much to talk about.
This case is so meaty in our opinion.
Dude, literally, we've spent like 3 hours just going over this, and like it took like sleeping on it to just be like, okay, well, this, and this, and it's like, dude, this case is
so sleeping on it and Dr. Wright.
Yeah, dude. Seriously.
Very similar to y'all, we did virtue ethics for that case, and it was like a list of virtues, so similar to y'all that have, fidelity and benevolence.
It ended up being almost the same.
We had the same thing.
We had a pretty much similar to the case one as well.
That's true. That's true.
That's how it is.
Oh, this is kind of what we talked about.
It's a little reassuring when it's like, I know what
they're talking about. Exactly.
But you think Patrick Stewart should be Professor X?
But he walks. He does walk later.
That's right.
He gets mutant powers.
Oh, that's true. Oh no. That's true.
So it had to be.
You're right about that. Oh man.
We basically had the same position as you, but we agreed that there is a point, like, not necessarily that definitely these actors should be represented and prioritized in the case that they are, they are actors, they provide a performance, you know what I mean, but like, or maybe you don't, I don't know. We do agree that in cases like Brokeback Mountain, this is still good representation because it is something that the community can still sympathize with, even if the actors themselves are not a part of that community.
So that's so interesting because when we started talking about sexuality in this, the reasoning, it's kind of similar to the visual thing that we were talking about, right? So like Neil Patrick Harris played a very straight person in How I Met Your Mother, right? And he's gay. And I wonder how our reasoning changes when if you're not limited visibly, right? If you're not limited visibly, is that just part of being an actor, right? Is the virtues of an actor to play someone that you are not?
I think we get the scores from the judges. So I'm going from my left to my right. So Megan is judge 1. So what was your scores?
Okay. Yeah, UCA score was 43 and UALR was 40.
Okay, 43 to 40. So Megan says that UCA won.
I had UCA at 46 and UALR at 47.
Okay, so 46 to 47. And according to Judge 2, UALR won. So we have the deciding judge.
I have UCA at 49 and UALR at 44.
Oh,
So close, y'all.
Yeah.